He thought money could silence the past. He was wrong. When Ethan Caldwell steered his black Range Rover off the plowed highway and onto the narrow dirt road leading to his log cabin in western Montana, he wasn't running from the press anymore. He was running from himself. The world knew him as a tech billionaire who could buy islands and senators, but tonight he was just a man driving 15 miles into pine forest, thick enough to swallow cell signals and regret alike. Snow had fallen 6 inches since dawn, frosting the evergreens and softening the rugged slopes of the Bitterroot Range into something deceptively peaceful. His cabin sat alone on 40 private acres, cedar logs darkened by winter windows, black chimney cold. He killed the engine and listened to the silence, the kind that presses against your ears until you hear your own pulse. No security team, no assistance, just a duffel bag, a bottle of bourbon, and a promise to disappear for a while. He crunched through the snow toward the porch boots, sinking 2 inches at a time, breath turning to vapor in the 20-degree air. That's when he noticed the door. It wasn't locked. Ethan was meticulous, obsessive even. He never left doors unlocked. A thin line of light cut across the floorboards inside, not from electricity, but from dying embers in the stone fireplace. His pulse shifted, not fear exactly, but something colder. He stepped in slowly, the scent of smoke and pine thick in the air, and then he saw them. 2 small figures curled together on the rug in front of the hearth, wrapped in one of his wool blankets. Shoes still on faces pale from the cold. Twin girls, maybe 8 years old, sleeping in his cabin like it was the only safe place left in the world. For a long moment, Ethan did not move, afraid that even the sound of his breath might shatter whatever fragile safety had brought them here. The fire in the stone hearth was barely alive, thin orange veins glowing under gray ash, throwing soft light across their faces. They looked almost identical, same pale blonde hair tangled at the ends, same narrow shoulders rising and falling in uneven rhythm. One of them clutched the edge of his blanket so tightly, her knuckles were white, as if even in sleep she expected it to be taken away. Ethan set his duffel bag down quietly and crouched a few feet away, studying details the way he used to study quarterly reports. Their sneakers were soaked through. Mud and pine needles clung to the rubber soles. The hem of one girl's coat was torn, not from play, from travel, from running. He glanced toward the open door behind him and felt the cold draft slipping in, reminding him that it was 20 degrees outside and dropping. Whoever left them here had not stayed to make sure they were warm. He rose, shut the door gently, and slid the deadbolt into place. The click echoed louder than it should have. One of the girls stirred at the sound, eyes snapping open with a sharp intake of breath. Blue eyes. Frightened but alert. She did not scream. She just stared at him as if measuring whether he was another danger or something else entirely. The second girl woke seconds later, pushing herself upright, pressing close to her sister. Ethan lifted his hands slowly, palms open, his voice steady but low. "I am not going to hurt you. You are safe here." He was not sure why he said it. He was not sure he believed it himself. The girl on the left tightened her grip on her sister and whispered something too soft to hear, her eyes never leaving Ethan's face. He stayed where he was, kneeling on the wide plank floor, the heat from the fireplace brushing one side of his body, while the rest of him felt the cold creeping in from the windows. "My name is Ethan," he said slowly, making sure every word was clear. "I live here. You are not in trouble." The taller of the two swallowed hard, her voice barely steady. "Are you going to send us back?" The question landed heavier than any accusation he had faced in a courtroom or boardroom. "Send you back where?" he asked, gently. The girls exchanged a look that spoke of something rehearsed, something they had promised each other not to say. "Nowhere," the smaller one answered quickly. "We just needed somewhere warm." Ethan noticed then that their hands bore faint marks around the wrists, old enough to be fading, but recent enough to matter. He felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. Outside, wind brushed against the cabin walls, carrying the distant hum of a truck engine somewhere beyond the tree line, then fading into silence. His property was private, gated half a mile down the road. No one should have been out there. The taller twins' eyes flicked toward the window at the same moment his did. They heard it too. Ethan stood slowly and walked to the glass, wiping away a thin layer of frost with his palm. The forest looked empty under the moonlight's silver and still, but the fresh tire tracks cutting across his long driveway had not been there this morning. The tire tracks cut deep into the snow, wide and deliberate, leading from the main road all the way to the clearing before his porch, then curving sharply back toward the trees, as if whoever had driven there did not want to linger. Ethan felt the weight of being watched, even though the forest stood still and silent under the pale Montana moon. Behind him, the girls had risen to their feet. He could hear the faint shuffle of their damp sneakers on the wooden floor. "Do not turn on the lights," the taller one whispered urgently. "Please." The request was not dramatic. It was instinctive. Ethan stepped back from the window and let the darkness remain illuminated only by the faint orange glow of the dying fire. "All right," he said calmly. He said, "No lights." He moved to the hearth and added 2 fresh logs, careful not to create too much flare. Warmth returned slowly, pushing back the cold air that slipped through the seams of the old cabin. "What are your names?" he asked, keeping his tone steady. The smaller twin hesitated before answering. "Lily," she nudged her sister gently. "And this is Emma." They both kept their eyes toward the window, as if expecting shadows to move. Ethan repeated their names, softly anchoring them in the room. "Lily, Emma, you are safe here tonight." The words sounded fragile even to him. Emma shook her head once. "They know this place," she said. "They dropped us near the gate. The gate is locked," Ethan replied automatically, then realized what that meant. Someone had known the code or had been given access. A memory flickered in his mind of contractors, charity partners, men in tailored coats shaking his hand months ago when he had hosted a winter fundraiser at this very cabin. He had trusted the wrong people before. The wind rose outside, brushing snow against the glass in a dry whisper. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something protective and fierce. Whoever had driven those tracks through his land had not just crossed property lines. They had crossed into something personal, and he was no longer certain that disappearing into the woods had been an escape. It might have been an invitation. The word fundraiser echoed in Ethan's mind like a distant alarm he had ignored for too long. 3 months ago, this cabin had been full of polished boots and catered trays, local officials shaking his hand beneath string lights strung between pine trees. He had opened his land for a children's outreach charity, proud to be seen supporting something wholesome in a county that barely trusted outsiders. Now 2 frightened 8-year-old girls stood in the same room, saying someone had dropped them at his private gate. Ethan knelt again so he would not tower over them. "How did you get inside the property?" he asked gently. Lily glanced at Emma before answering. The truck stopped near the keypad. The driver punched numbers. The gate opened. That meant the code had not been guessed. It had been known. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Did you see his face?" Emma shook her head. "He wore a cap. He did not talk much. He just said to wait until the house lights were off." Ethan felt a coldness that had nothing to do with winter. Someone had timed his arrival. Someone had expected him to come back tonight after weeks away. He stood and walked toward the kitchen, pulling bottled water and a box of granola bars from the pantry. He placed them on the coffee table, carefully making the gesture deliberate and slow. "Eat slowly," he said. "Your bodies need time to warm up." The girls hesitated only a second before unwrapping the bars, hunger overcoming caution. As they ate, Ethan checked his phone. No signal. The forest swallowed reception after the first mile. His satellite phone sat in a drawer near the stairs, but calling the sheriff without understanding what he was stepping into could push the girls back into whatever they had escaped. Outside, the wind died suddenly, leaving a silence so complete it felt staged. Ethan moved to the side window that faced the long driveway. Fresh snow began to fall again, light but steady, already softening the sharp edges of the tire tracks. Within an hour they would be blurred. By morning, they could be gone. The snowfall thickened, small white flecks drifting past the windows like static across a dark screen, erasing evidence inch by inch. Ethan watched until the last clear outline of the tire tracks softened into a pale blur. Then he stepped away from the glass, with a decision forming in his chest. He walked to the drawer near the staircase and removed the satellite phone, its weight heavier than he remembered. Lily noticed immediately. "You are calling them," she said quietly. It was not a question. Ethan paused. The instinct to solve problems with authority and money had built his empire, but this felt different. "If I call the sheriff," he replied carefully, "they will ask where you came from. They will ask who brought you here." Emma's fingers tightened around the empty wrapper in her lap. "They will send us back before they believe us," she whispered. Ethan studied their faces in the firelight, the way their eyes held a kind of practiced vigilance no child should carry. He had seen that look before in employees who had signed non-disclosure agreements they did not fully understand, in small-town partners pressured into smiling for photographs. It was the look of people who knew power could bend truth. He lowered the satellite phone slowly and set it back in the drawer. "Tonight," he said, "you stay here. No calls, no lights. Just rest." Relief did not wash over the girls. It flickered, cautious and temporary. Ethan moved through the cabin, checking each window latch, securing the back door, drawing the heavy curtains that blocked the forest from view. 40 acres had once made him feel untouchable. Now the distance felt like isolation in its most dangerous form. He returned to the living room and dragged a thick armchair closer to the fireplace. "I will sit here," he told them. "If anyone comes near this house, I will know." Lily tilted her head slightly. "Why would you help us?" she asked. Ethan stared into the flames, watching them consume the new logs with a low, steady crackle. "Because someone used my gate," he said after a long moment. "And that means this is no longer just your problem." The fire burned steadier now, casting slow-moving shadows along the log walls, but Ethan did not let the warmth fool him into comfort. He remained in the armchair, eyes half on the flames and half on the dark windows, listening to every shift in the night. Lily and Emma sat close together on the rug, their backs against the couch, exhaustion pulling at them, even as fear kept them alert. After several minutes of silence, Lily spoke again, her voice barely above the crackle of wood. "They were not supposed to bring us this far." Ethan turned slightly toward her. "What do you mean?" Emma answered this time, choosing her words carefully. "We heard them talking. They said Montana was too far. Someone else was supposed to pick us up closer to town." Ethan felt the pieces begin to move in his mind, not yet forming a clear picture but aligning into something deliberate. So this was not random, not a desperate driver abandoning cargo. This was a mistake, a change of plan, a miscalculation that had ended with 2 children inside his cabin. "Did they say any names?" he asked quietly. The girls exchanged another look. One name Emma admitted, a man with a silver ring. "He makes the calls." Ethan's stomach tightened. Silver ring. The phrase sounded ordinary, almost harmless, but something about it lingered. He had shaken thousands of hands in his career, attended charity galas, private investment dinners, closed-door meetings. Rings had flashed under chandeliers, symbols of wealth and loyalty. He tried to summon a specific face, but found only fragments. Outside, a faint crunch echoed across the snow. Not wind, not branches. A measured sound like tires rolling slowly over packed ground. All 3 of them froze. Ethan stood immediately and moved toward the side window, keeping his body low. Headlights flickered briefly between the trees nearly 200 yards away, then vanished as if deliberately dimmed. The engine sound cut off. Silence returned thicker than before. Lily's whisper carried through the room. They came back. The darkness outside felt alive now, no longer empty forest, but something watching from between the trees. Ethan lowered himself carefully beneath the window frame, his heartbeat steady but louder in his ears. He motioned for the girls to move away from the open space near the fireplace. They crawled quickly behind the couch, small hands gripping the fabric as if it were armor. The snow continued to fall, thin and steady, softening sound, but not erasing it completely. After a few seconds, the faint crunch returned closer this time, deliberate and slow, like someone testing how much noise they made. Ethan's mind shifted into a different gear, the same focused clarity he used during hostile corporate negotiations. He stood quietly and moved toward the back hallway, where a wall panel concealed a security monitor system he rarely used. He flipped the small switch that activated the battery-powered cameras mounted along the driveway and near the gate. The screens flickered to life in muted gray tones. On the third camera, just beyond the bend in the drive, a dark SUV idled without headlights. Its shape was familiar in a way that unsettled him, large, expensive, out of place in rural Montana at midnight. A door opened briefly. A figure stepped out, tall, wearing a heavy coat and gloves. The face remained hidden in shadow. The person walked a few yards toward the house, then stopped as if reconsidering. Lily's voice trembled from behind the couch. "That is the truck." Ethan studied the screen, memorizing details. The license plate was partially obscured by snow. The vehicle remained still for nearly a full minute, engine humming low. Then slowly, the figure returned to the driver's seat. The headlights did not come on. Instead, the SUV reversed carefully, turning in a wide arc until it faced the direction of the main road. Only when it reached the edge of camera range did the lights flash on briefly, before disappearing behind thick pine trunks. The engine sound faded into the distance. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing he had not breathed deeply in several seconds. This was no accident. Whoever had left the girls here was checking to see if their mistake could be corrected. The security monitor screens dimmed back to black, but the image of the dark SUV remained burned into Ethan's mind like a warning he could not ignore. He walked back into the living room, slowly measuring each step, recalibrating the situation with the precision that had once made him untouchable in business. Lily and Emma were still crouched behind the couch, eyes wide, shoulders tense. They did not ask if the vehicle was gone. They already knew. They had learned to read silence the way other children read bedtime stories. "They will not stop," Emma said quietly. Ethan sat across from them on the hardwood floor, lowering himself to their level again. "Then we make sure they cannot come back," he replied. His tone had shifted. Less uncertainty, more intent. He moved toward the mudroom and pulled on his winter coat and boots, then grabbed a heavy flashlight from the hook near the door. Lily stood quickly. "Do not go outside." They watched from the trees. Ethan met her gaze. "I need to see how far they came onto the property. I will not leave the porch light off. I promise." He stepped outside into the cold night, breath turning to frost instantly. The snowfall had slowed but not stopped. The air smelled sharp and metallic. He kept the flashlight beam low, scanning the ground. The fresh tire tracks from earlier were nearly erased, but new impressions cut through the thin layer of snow, curving close to the tree line about 150 yards from the cabin. They had not approached the front steps. They had waited, observed, measured his reaction. Ethan crouched and pressed his gloved hand into one of the tracks. The tread pattern was distinct, aggressive, built for winter terrain. Not a random rental. A deliberate vehicle. He stood and turned slowly, sweeping the flashlight across the forest edge. Pine trunks rose like dark pillars, unmoving, silent witnesses. No movement. No sound. Yet the stillness felt intentional. After several minutes, he returned inside and locked the door behind him. He walked straight to the drawer with the satellite phone again, but did not pick it up. Instead, he opened a second drawer beneath it and removed a slim metal case containing old event records from the winter fundraiser. Guest lists, vendor contacts, security access codes that had been shared temporarily. His eyes scanned the printed names, searching for any memory of a man who wore a silver ring and moved through rooms without drawing attention. The girls watched him from across the room, sensing the shift from survival to investigation. Ethan realized something then, with unsettling clarity. Whoever had brought them here knew exactly whose property they were stepping onto, and that meant this was not just about hiding children. It was about sending a message to him. The guest list trembled slightly in Ethan's hands, not from fear but from recognition that this was no longer an abstract threat moving through the dark woods. It had roots, names, connections. He spread the papers across the dining table beneath the low glow of a single lamp, careful to keep the curtains sealed tight. Lily and Emma remained near the fireplace, whispering to each other in tones too low to make out, their eyes drifting toward him, as if he now held answers that could change everything. Ethan scanned the printed columns again. Local donors, county officials, representatives from a nonprofit called Northern Light Outreach, the organization he had agreed to fund after a polished presentation about rural child welfare. He remembered the applause, the cameras, the feeling that he was rebuilding his public image one generous check at a time. He also remembered the handshake of a man who had stood slightly apart from the rest, observing more than speaking. Tall, calm. A silver ring catching the chandelier light when he reached for a glass of water. Ethan's finger stopped on a name halfway down the page. Daniel Mercer, listed as a regional coordinator for Northern Light Outreach. No photograph on the printed roster, but the memory aligned too cleanly to ignore. He moved to his laptop and powered it on the screen, casting a cold blue glow across the cabin walls. With the satellite connection engaged, he accessed archived event footage stored in his private cloud. The video from that night loaded slowly, buffering in thin increments. He fast-forwarded past speeches and staged smiles until he found a wide shot of the crowd mingling near the stone fireplace. There, near the edge of the frame, a man in a charcoal coat posture relaxed, watching rather than participating. When the camera angle shifted, the light struck his hand clearly. A simple silver ring on his right index finger. Ethan froze the frame and zoomed in. The face was sharp enough to confirm the memory. Calm eyes. Controlled expression. A man comfortable in any room. Lily's small voice cut through the quiet. That is him. Ethan turned slowly toward the girls. You are sure? Emma nodded without hesitation. He is the one who tells them where to go. Ethan felt the room narrow around him, the weight of realization pressing against his ribs. This was not a random driver checking on lost cargo. This was someone who had stood in his home, shaken his hand, and walked through his property under the pretense of charity. The horrifying part was not just the betrayal. It was the possibility that Ethan's own money had helped build the very network these girls were running from. The frozen image of Daniel Mercer on the laptop screen felt like a silent accusation. Ethan stared at it long enough for the fire behind him to settle into a low, steady burn, the only sound in the room besides the faint hum of the computer fan. He had built companies by identifying patterns others missed, by tracing connections hidden beneath clean spreadsheets and public statements. Now he began doing the same with his own past decisions. Northern Light Outreach had approached him 6 months ago with data about missing children in rural counties, charts, and testimonials that were difficult to ignore. He had wired $2 million within 48 hours, proud of the speed, proud of the impact. He had never demanded a deep audit. His legal team had cleared the paperwork. That had been enough for him. Lily and Emma watched his face carefully, as if trying to read whether this discovery meant safety or something worse. Ethan closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in his chair, pressing his palms against his eyes for a brief second. "Did he ever come near you directly?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "He does not touch anyone. He just decides." Lily added, "He talks to the men who drive. He tells them where to drop kids and where to pick them up." The calmness in her voice disturbed Ethan more than panic would have. She spoke like someone describing a schedule, not a crime. "How many other children were there?" he asked quietly. The girls hesitated. "A lot," Lily said finally. "Different houses, different towns. They move us around so nobody asks questions." Ethan felt a cold wave of realization. This was not chaos. It was structure, rotating locations, controlled transfers, funding disguised as charity. His money had not simply vanished into inefficiency. It might have financed vehicles, properties, salaries. The thought hollowed him out from the inside. Outside, the snow finally stopped, leaving a clear night sky stretching over the mountains. The storm had passed, but the visibility it left behind felt dangerous. Ethan stood and walked toward the window again, staring out at the dark tree line. Somewhere beyond those pines, Mercer was confident enough to circle back and observe. Confident enough to believe that Ethan Caldwell would either ignore what he had seen or call the wrong people. Ethan understood something then, with painful clarity. If he reported this through ordinary channels without proof, the network would scatter before sunrise, and Lily and Emma would become ghosts no database could find. The cabin felt smaller as the truth settled in, not because the walls had moved, but because the illusion of safety had collapsed. Ethan remained standing near the window, staring at the forest, while his mind calculated consequences. If he called the county sheriff, the report would travel through local channels within hours. If Mercer had influence here, which now seemed likely, word would reach him before any warrant did. The network would dissolve, relocate, erase its traces. Lily and Emma would be classified as found runaways, processed, and quietly redirected. Ethan turned back toward the room, toward the two children who had unknowingly walked into the center of his conscience. "I need to understand how they move you," he said carefully. "Vehicles, houses, names, anything you remember." Emma hugged her knees closer. "There is a warehouse near a river," she said after a moment. "We only stayed there one night. They said it was temporary." Lily added, "The drivers use different phones every time. They do not keep them. They throw them away." Ethan nodded slowly. Disposable communication, rotating properties, rural locations with low surveillance. It was methodical. He walked to his desk and opened a secure financial portal on his laptop, accessing transaction histories connected to Northern Light Outreach. Payments had been divided into sub-grants, then redistributed to shell contractors listed as youth housing coordinators. He cross-referenced addresses quickly. 3 were within a 100-mile radius of his property. One of them sat near the Clark Fork River, the same river that cut through the valley 20 miles west of here. His pulse accelerated. Lily noticed. "That is where they took the older kids," she whispered. Ethan closed the laptop gently, the decision forming with sharp clarity. He could not expose this from a distance. He needed proof that could not be dismissed or buried. "I am going to drive out before sunrise," he said. "I will follow the river road and confirm whether that warehouse is active." Emma's eyes widened. They watched that place. Ethan crouched in front of them again, his voice steady but firm. "Listen to me. You will stay here. The security system records everything. If anyone approaches it, will alert my phone. I will be less than 30 minutes away." Lily shook her head instinctively. What if they come back? Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle fully onto his shoulders. "Then they will find me waiting," he said quietly. For the first time since arriving, his fear shifted into something else entirely. Not panic, not anger, resolve. The storm outside had passed, leaving the sky clear and the moon bright over the snow-covered valley. Visibility was high now, too high for secrets to remain hidden for long. And Ethan understood that once he stepped off this property at dawn, there would be no returning to the man who had driven up here seeking solitude. Sleep did not touch the cabin that night. Ethan remained awake in the armchair, while Lily and Emma eventually drifted into a restless half-sleep beneath layered blankets near the fire. He watched the first pale line of dawn stretch across the mountain ridge through a narrow slit in the curtains, feeling as if the light itself were interrogating him. For years, he had believed impact was measured in stock prices, in press releases, in the number of zeros on a wire transfer. He had told himself that intention mattered more than oversight. Now 2 children lay 10 feet away because he had trusted a presentation more than his instincts. The realization did not arrive gently. It arrived like weight pressing down on his chest. His name had given legitimacy. His funding had built infrastructure. His silence had made it easy. When the clock on the wall ticked to 5:30 in the morning, he stood and moved quietly to the desk. He printed copies of the transaction records, the event guest list, the still frame of Daniel Mercer, with the silver ring visible under warm chandelier light. He placed them into a waterproof envelope and slid it into the inner pocket of his coat. Then he walked to the fireplace and crouched beside the girls. Lily stirred first, blinking up at him with guarded awareness. "Is it time?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. "I am going to the river road. I will not go near the building. I will only observe. If I see confirmation, I will contact federal authorities directly, not local." Emma pushed herself upright, her voice thin but steady. "He has friends in town." Ethan met her gaze. "I have friends outside of town," he replied, "and they do not answer to anyone here." He stood and moved toward the mudroom, pulling on his boots and gloves with deliberate calm. The cabin felt different in the morning light, less like refuge and more like a line that had been drawn. Before opening the door, he turned back once more. "If anyone approaches you, lock yourselves in the upstairs bedroom and activate the red button beside the bed. It triggers a silent alarm to my phone. Do not open the door for anyone but me." Lily swallowed hard but nodded. Ethan stepped outside into the brittle Montana morning. The snow under his boots cracked sharply in the cold air. The valley lay exposed under clear sky, every pine branch outlined in silver. There would be no more hiding in darkness now. Whatever waited near the Clark Fork River was part of a system he had unknowingly helped finance, and he intended to see it with his own eyes. The Range Rover cut through the frozen morning like a dark blade against white earth tires gripping packed snow as Ethan steered toward the narrow river road Lily had described. The Clark Fork ran parallel to the highway for several miles before bending west into a less traveled industrial stretch, dotted with aging storage facilities and abandoned mills. He kept his speed steady at 35 miles per hour, eyes scanning every turnout and gravel path. The mountains rose sharply on either side, trapping the cold in the valley like a sealed vault. When he reached mile marker 19, he slowed. A rusted sign half buried in snow marked a private access road leading down toward the water. According to the address he had traced through shell companies, the warehouse sat somewhere beyond that bend. Ethan turned off his headlights, even though daylight had broken fully across the sky. He did not want reflection off the windshield to announce him too early. The access road narrowed to a single lane of packed gravel glazed with ice, fresh tire marks carved through the frost, not yet softened by sun. Someone had been here recently. He followed at a distance, keeping the engine quiet, heart beating with controlled intensity rather than fear. The trees thinned as the river came into view, gray water moving slowly beneath a crust of forming ice. And then he saw it. A long rectangular warehouse painted dull beige windows, small and high, a chain-link fence surrounding the perimeter. 2 dark vans were parked near a side entrance. No company logos, no signage, just blank metal against winter light. Ethan pulled off behind a cluster of leafless cottonwoods roughly 200 yards away and shut off the engine. From this distance he could observe without drawing attention. He lifted his phone and activated the camera, zooming in carefully. A side door opened. A man stepped out wearing a heavy coat, and Glove's posture, composed movements, unhurried. Even from afar, Ethan recognized the silhouette. The same calm presence, the same controlled gait. When the man raised his hand to adjust his collar, the sun caught the glint of a silver ring. Daniel Mercer stood outside the warehouse, as if it were an ordinary business site on an ordinary morning. Ethan felt something break open inside his chest, not rage but clarity. This was real, tangible, documented, and it had his money woven into its walls. He took several photographs, steadying his breath. Then his phone vibrated in his hand. A security alert from the cabin. Motion detected at the front door. The notification on Ethan's phone pulsed like a warning flare in his palm. Motion detected at the front door. For a fraction of a second, the warehouse, the river, Daniel Mercer standing under pale winter sun, all blurred into the background. Nothing mattered except the image that might be unfolding at the cabin. He opened the security application, with steady hands forcing his breath into control. The live feed loaded slowly each second, stretching thin. The camera angle showed the porch, the snow swept aside from earlier footprints, and a dark figure standing directly in front of the door. The man wore a charcoal coat. His posture was relaxed, almost patient. Ethan zoomed in digitally. The face was clear now. Daniel Mercer was not at the warehouse, or if he had been, he had moved quickly. The silver ring flashed as he lifted his hand and knocked 3 times, firm and deliberate. Inside the cabin, there was no movement visible from this camera, which meant Lily and Emma had followed instructions. Ethan's mind raced through distance and time. 20 miles back. Snow-packed roads. Even at 50 miles per hour, it would take him at least 25 minutes to return. Mercer knocked again, then stepped back slightly, as if giving whoever was inside space to respond. His expression did not show urgency. It showed confidence. Ethan felt guilt surge like heat through his chest. This was not random escalation. Mercer knew the girls were inside. He knew Ethan had gone somewhere. Perhaps someone at the warehouse had noticed the distant vehicle. Perhaps this entire morning had been anticipated. Ethan shifted his focus. He tapped another icon and activated the interior hallway camera. The feed showed the empty corridor and the base of the staircase. No sign of the girls. Good. They were upstairs. Mercer's silhouette moved closer to the door camera again. He leaned slightly toward the lens and smiled faintly, as if aware he was being watched. Then his phone appeared in his hand. Ethan's own device buzzed immediately with an incoming call from an unknown number, the screen illuminated with cold clarity against the pale dashboard light. Mercer was calling him. In that suspended moment, Ethan understood the full scope of the trap. This was not about retrieving 2 children quietly. This was about leverage, about reminding him that power could move faster than distance. The cabin stood alone on 40 acres of snow-covered silence, and inside it, 2 8-year-old girls were hiding, while the man who orchestrated their movement stood calmly at the door. Ethan pressed accept on the call, his voice steady despite the storm rising beneath it. "What do you want?" Daniel Mercer's voice came through the speaker, smooth and unhurried, as if he were confirming a lunch reservation, rather than standing outside a secluded cabin in rural Montana. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," he said evenly. "I believe you have something that belongs to us." Ethan kept his eyes locked on the live feed, watching Mercer's posture, the calm tilt of his head, the silver ring catching winter light. "They are not property." Ethan replied, his tone controlled but edged with steel. Mercer gave a soft exhale that almost resembled amusement. "Words are flexible," he said. "Circumstances are not. You left your property unexpectedly at dawn. That was unfortunate timing." Ethan felt the confirmation settle like ice in his veins. They had watchers, at the warehouse, on the road. Possibly even closer than he realized. "If you are at my door," Ethan said carefully, "then you know I have already seen the river site." There was a pause on the line, subtle but present. Mercer adjusted his collar, glancing briefly toward the tree line, as if calculating distances. "You misunderstand the scale of this," he replied. "That building is one of many. You close one door, and another opens 2 states away. The network does not depend on a single address." Ethan shifted his grip on the steering wheel, grounding himself in something physical. "I have documentation," he said. "Financial transfers, event footage, your face." Mercer smiled again, this time without warmth. "Documentation can disappear. Reputations can collapse. You are already recovering from public scrutiny. Imagine how quickly headlines would shift if stories surfaced about children found on your private land." Ethan understood the implication instantly. They were prepared to reverse the narrative, to paint him as the predator rather than the witness. His name, his wealth, his isolation in the mountains would become ammunition. "You made a mistake bringing them to my gate," Ethan said quietly. Mercer's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "No," he answered. "We made an adjustment. You were always meant to see something eventually. Consider this an invitation to remain cooperative. Release them, and this conversation ends without inconvenience." Ethan glanced at the interior camera feed again. The hallway remained empty. The girls were still hidden. "You chose the wrong man to intimidate," Ethan said finally. Mercer's smile faded completely. "Then you have chosen a difficult path," he replied. The call ended abruptly. On the screen, Mercer stepped back from the door, studied the cabin one last time, and walked down the porch steps with measured calm. Ethan did not move until he saw the dark vehicle reverse out of frame. His heart pounded, not from fear now, but from resolve sharpened by threat. They were willing to weaponize his name. They believed he would protect his empire first. They did not understand that something inside him had already shifted beyond reputation and profit, and he was no longer negotiating. Ethan did not waste another second. He started the engine and accelerated back toward the main road, tires biting into packed snow as the mountains blurred past his windows. His mind moved faster than the vehicle, assembling a strategy that did not rely on local law enforcement or quiet negotiations. Mercer believed reputation was Ethan's weakest point. He was wrong. Reputation could be rebuilt. Children could not. As he drove, Ethan activated a secure encrypted line on his phone, one used only for corporate crises that required federal oversight. Within moments, he reached a former Department of Justice official who now led a private investigative task force specializing in interstate financial crimes. "I need federal eyes immediately," Ethan said, without preamble. "I have live video evidence, transaction records, and a location tied to a multi-state child transport network operating under nonprofit cover." There was silence on the other end, then a measured response. "Send everything. Do not alert local authorities yet." Ethan forwarded the photographs of the warehouse, the still frame of Mercer at his door, the financial transfers linked to shell contractors. By the time he reached the highway, confirmation arrived that federal agents were mobilizing from Missoula and Helena simultaneously. Estimated response time to the river site was under 40 minutes. Ethan exhaled for the first time since the phone call. He turned up the long drive toward his cabin, heart steady, but charged with urgency. As he approached the gate, he noticed a second set of tire tracks overlaying Mercer's departure route. Different tread pattern, larger vehicle, unmarked but official in stance. The task force had moved faster than promised. When Ethan reached the cabin, he saw 2 dark SUVs parked discreetly near the tree line agents, positioned with controlled precision around the perimeter. One stepped forward as Ethan exited his vehicle, identifying himself quietly and confirming receipt of all evidence. "We intercepted communications within the network 10 minutes ago," the agent said. "Your call triggered internal alerts on their end. They are attempting to relocate assets. Teams are en route to multiple properties." Ethan nodded, once feeling the scale of what had begun. Inside the cabin, Lily and Emma waited at the top of the stairs, eyes wide but hopeful as he entered. "It is over," Ethan said gently. "Not just for you. For all of them." Within the hour, confirmation came through secure channels. The warehouse by the river had been secured. Additional sites across 2 neighboring states were being investigated. Mercer had attempted to leave the county, but was detained on a federal warrant tied to financial fraud and conspiracy charges. The network that believed it could intimidate him into silence had underestimated one crucial factor. Ethan Caldwell had already accepted the cost of exposure, and once he did, he had nothing left to lose. By late afternoon, the quiet valley no longer felt isolated, but protected. Federal vehicles moved in and out of the property with quiet efficiency agents coordinating through low voices and encrypted radios. Ethan stood on the porch, watching the controlled activity, the same snow-covered landscape now carrying a different weight. It was no longer a place of hidden danger, but the starting point of exposure. Inside the cabin, Lily and Emma sat at the kitchen table wrapped in fresh blankets provided by victim support specialists who had arrived with the task force. The girls answered questions gently, carefully, their small hands wrapped around warm mugs of cocoa. No harsh lights, no raised voices, just patient professionals documenting every detail. Ethan remained close but did not interrupt. This was their truth to speak. An agent approached him near the doorway. "We have confirmation of 7 additional miners located across 3 sites," the agent said quietly. "All safe. Transportation units are arranging secure placement and medical evaluations." Ethan nodded, emotion tightening his throat in a way no business victory ever had. His financial records had given investigators a blueprint. His footage of Mercer at the door had provided undeniable linkage. By early evening, national authorities had announced a multi-state investigation into fraudulent nonprofit operations tied to organized child exploitation. Ethan's name appeared in early reports not as a suspect, but as a cooperating witness who had alerted federal agencies. He knew headlines would follow. Analysts would dissect his prior donations. Critics would question how he had not seen the warning signs sooner. He accepted that. Inside the cabin, Lily looked up at him as he entered. "Is he gone?" she asked. Ethan crouched beside her chair. "He's not coming back," he said gently. "Not here. Not anywhere near you." Emma studied his face for a long moment, searching for doubt. Finding none, her shoulders lowered for the first time since he had met her. Outside, the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting a gold wash over the snow. The valley seemed calmer than it had in days. Ethan stepped back onto the porch as the last federal vehicle prepared to depart. The lead agent paused beside him. "What you did today will echo far beyond this county," she said. Ethan watched the taillights disappear down the long driveway. He had spent years measuring success in quarterly reports and market share. Now he understood impact differently. It was measured in children who would sleep without fear tonight. And that was a return no portfolio could ever calculate. That night, the cabin felt different in a way Ethan could not fully explain. The same stone fireplace burned steadily, the same pine walls held the warmth, but the silence no longer pressed in with suspicion. It rested gently like a deep breath finally released. Lily and Emma sat cross-legged on the rug, a deck of playing cards spread between them, their laughter small but real, as they tried to teach Ethan a game they used to play before everything changed. He fumbled the rules on purpose just to see them smile again. Outside, the snow reflected moonlight in soft silver waves across the 40 acres, untouched and quiet. The forest no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like protection. Earlier that evening, a child advocacy coordinator had spoken with Ethan privately about temporary guardianship arrangements until long-term placements could be determined. The process would take weeks, maybe months. Background checks, court approvals, psychological evaluations. Ethan had listened carefully and then said something that surprised even him. "I am not stepping away from this. If they need stability, I can provide it. Now watching the twins argue playfully over whose turn it was, he understood that commitment more clearly. Lily glanced up at him suddenly. You are not going to disappear again, are you? Ethan met her eyes across the firelight. No, he answered without hesitation. I am staying. Emma studied him for a second, then nodded as if sealing an unspoken agreement. The wind moved softly through the pines outside, no longer carrying threat, only the steady rhythm of winter settling over the valley. Ethan had come to this cabin to escape the noise of his own life. Instead, he had found something far more demanding and far more meaningful. And for the first time in years, he did not feel alone. Weeks passed, and the cabin gradually transformed from a place of emergency into a home shaped by routine. Mornings began with the smell of pancakes instead of tension. Ethan learned that Lily preferred extra syrup, while Emma insisted on cutting hers into perfect squares before eating. School officials from the nearest town worked with federal advocates to arrange private tutoring at the cabin until the girls felt ready for a classroom again. The long driveway that once carried unwanted visitors now welcomed a steady rhythm of counselors, teachers, and caseworkers who moved with compassion rather than suspicion. Ethan found himself restructuring his entire schedule around spelling tests and afternoon walks through the snow. His business calls became shorter, more selective. He appointed new executives to oversee divisions that once consumed his attention. In public statements, he announced the creation of a foundation dedicated to auditing and protecting rural child welfare organizations, this time with layers of transparency he would personally supervise. Analysts debated whether his shift was strategic image repair. Commentators speculated about long-term financial implications. None of that mattered when he was kneeling in the living room, helping Emma assemble a model airplane, or standing outside, teaching Lily how to throw a baseball across the frozen yard without slipping. One evening, as dusk settled over the mountains, the three of them built a small snowman near the porch. The girls argued about whether it needed a scarf. Ethan surrendered his own wool one to settle the debate. Their laughter carried across the 40 acres, unfiltered and bright against the winter air. In that sound, there was no trace of the fear that had first brought them here. There was only possibility. And Ethan realized that redemption was not a single dramatic act. It was a series of quiet promises kept every single day. Spring arrived slowly in the Montana Valley, melting the heavy snow into clear streams that ran alongside the long driveway where fear once lingered. The cabin windows were open now, carrying the scent of pine and thawing earth into every room. Lily and Emma had grown inches taller since winter, their laughter fuller, their steps lighter as they raced each other across the yard without looking over their shoulders. Court hearings had concluded weeks earlier, formalizing temporary guardianship under Ethan's name, while long-term arrangements continued. The foundation he established had already begun restructuring oversight policies nationwide, creating independent audit systems so that no organization could hide behind polished presentations again. But none of those victories felt as meaningful as the small rituals unfolding inside the cabin. On a warm Saturday morning, Ethan stood at the kitchen counter flipping pancakes, while the girls debated what color to paint the treehouse he had promised to build near the edge of the woods. Blue Lily insisted. Green Emma countered. Ethan smiled and suggested both. Later that afternoon, as sunlight filtered through budding branches, the three of them sat on the porch steps, watching the river in the distance shimmer under clear sky. Months ago, he had come here seeking isolation from scandal and noise. Instead, he had found responsibility, truth, and something he had never purchased or negotiated. When Emma leaned her head briefly against his shoulder without hesitation, the gesture carried more weight than any contract he had ever signed. The valley was quiet again, but it was no longer the quiet of secrets. It was the quiet of safety earned. And as the sun dipped low over 40 acres of open land, Ethan understood that the most valuable legacy he would ever build was not measured in billions. It was measured in the steady heartbeat of a home that would never again be a hiding place. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss other heartwarming stories. Click on the last screen to see the next emotional chapter waiting for you. See you in the next story.